She was closing the pawn shop when the CEO saw the teddy bear with his missing daughter's name tag, and he froze. The morning sun cast long shadows through the dusty windows of Miller's pawn shop, illuminating particles that danced like memories in the stale air. Grace Miller stood behind the counter that had been her family's lifeline for 3 generations, her weathered hands clutching the keys that would soon unlock nothing but emptiness. "Last day, huh?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the distant rumble of construction equipment gathering outside like vultures. The foreclosure notice had been taped to the front door for weeks now, its official language as cold and unforgiving as the Chicago winter that had just begun to loosen its grip on the city. After months of fighting creditors and drowning in bills that seemed to multiply overnight, Grace had finally accepted the inevitable. The neighborhood was changing, and there was no place left for a little pawn shop that dealt in broken dreams and forgotten treasures. She moved slowly between the shelves, running her fingers along items that told stories their owners could no longer afford to remember. A wedding ring that probably financed someone's last meal. A guitar that once filled a living room with music before the electricity got cut off. Each piece represented a moment when someone had to choose between sentiment and survival. Grace paused at a small cardboard box tucked behind the register. Inside lay the unclaimed items, things people had pawned but never returned for. These would have to be disposed of somehow. Though the thought of throwing away someone's memories made her stomach turn, her fingers found a faded pink teddy bear at the bottom of the box. Its fur matted from years of handling. A small embroidered tag hung from its neck. "For my Princess Olivia, with all my love. Daddy 2016. Grace's heart clenched. She remembered the woman who'd brought it in. Desperate, shaking hands, eyes red from crying. "Ma'am, I really need the money," the woman had pleaded back in 2017. "It's just temporary. I'll be back for it. I promise." But she never came back. They never did when desperation drove them through Grace's door. The sound of expensive leather shoes on the worn linoleum made Grace look up. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stood in the doorway, his presence filling the small space with an authority that seemed to push against the walls. Even in the dim light, she could see he was the kind of man who was used to getting what he wanted. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that money bought and power polished. "Mrs. Miller," his voice was deep, controlled, but Grace caught something else underneath, an impatience that suggested this visit was beneath him. "Just Grace," she replied, instinctively clutching the teddy bear closer to her chest. "You must be from Whitaker Development." Daniel Whitaker stepped further into the shop, his sharp blue eyes scanning the cluttered space with the efficiency of someone calculating square footage and profit margins. Grace had heard about him. The ruthless CEO who'd been buying up properties in the neighborhood like pieces on a chessboard, tearing down the old to make way for glass towers that touched the sky. "I'm here for the final inspection," he said, pulling out his phone. "The demolition crew will be here Monday morning." Grace nodded, though her throat felt tight. "I know. I've been packing up the last of everything." Daniel barely seemed to hear her, already moving toward the back of the shop where water damage had weakened the foundation. But then he stopped mid-stride, his phone slipping from his fingers and clattering to the floor. His eyes were fixed on the teddy bear in Grace's arms with an intensity that made her take a step back. The color had drained from his face, and for a moment, the powerful businessman looked like he'd seen a ghost. "Where did you get that?" His voice was barely a whisper now, but there was something dangerous in it, a desperation that made Grace's pulse quicken. "Get what?" Grace glanced down at the bear, then back at his face. The transformation was startling. Gone was the confident developer, replaced by a man who looked like he was drowning. "The bear!" Daniel's hands were shaking as he pointed. "That exact bear! Where did you get it?" Grace hesitated. Something about his reaction told her this wasn't a casual question. Someone pawned it years ago. Why? What was her name? Daniel took a step closer, and Grace could see his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. The woman who brought it in. What was her name? I'm not sure I should," Grace began, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't anger she saw there. It was pain so raw it made her chest ache in sympathy. "Please." The word came out broken, and Grace realized this powerful man was on the verge of tears. "I need to know." Grace set the bear down on the counter and moved to her filing cabinet, her movements careful and deliberate. She'd learned long ago that desperate people could be unpredictable. And this man, for all his expensive clothes and polished exterior, was drowning in desperation. "Carmen Brooks," she said finally, pulling out a faded receipt. She brought it in October 2017, paid her $50 for it. Daniel's knees seemed to buckle, and he grabbed the edge of the counter for support. "Carmen," he breathed. "My wife, my ex-wife." The pieces began falling into place for Grace. She'd seen enough heartbreak walk through her doors to recognize it, even when it wore a $3,000 suit. "This bear," Daniel said, his voice gaining strength but losing control. "I gave it to my daughter for her 4th birthday, April 15th, 2016. He looked up at Grace, and she could see tears threatening to spill over. "My daughter Olivia disappeared that summer, vanished without a trace from Lincoln Park while she was playing with her mother." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. She remembered Carmen Brooks now, remembered the way she'd clutched that bear like it was keeping her alive, the way her hands had shaken when she'd signed the pawn slip. "The police said she was probably taken by someone," Daniel continued, his words coming faster now. "Someone who'd been watching her, waiting for the right moment. They had leads, suspects, but nothing ever came of it. The case went cold. Carmen blamed me, said if I hadn't been working so much, if I'd been there instead of in some meeting." His voice cracked. She was right. Grace reached across the counter and gently touched his arm. "I'm so sorry, I had no idea." "Why would Carmen pawn Olivia's bear?" Daniel asked, more to himself than to Grace. "Unless," his eyes widened with a realization that seemed to terrify him, "unless she knew something, unless she knew what happened to Olivia." The shop fell silent, except for the distant sound of traffic and the steady tick of the old clock on the wall. Grace watched as Daniel Whitaker, the man who'd come here to claim the final piece of his real estate empire, crumbled before her eyes. "Mr. Whitaker," Grace said softly, "I think you need to sit down." But Daniel was already moving, pacing the small space like a caged animal. "I have to find her. I have to find Carmen. She's the key to everything." As Grace watched this powerful man fall apart in her little pawn shop, clutching his daughter's teddy bear like a lifeline, she realized that some things were worth more than money, or buildings, or empires. Some things were worth everything. And sometimes, salvation came from the most unexpected places. Daniel's hands trembled as he dialed the number he'd memorized but never wanted to use again. Outside Miller's pawn shop, the late afternoon shadows stretched across the cracked pavement like fingers reaching for something lost. "Brennan Investigations," came the gruff voice on the other end. "Mike, it's Daniel Whitaker. I need you to drop everything you're doing." A pause. "Jesus, Daniel. It's been what? 3 years. I thought you'd made peace with—" "I found something." Daniel cut him off, his voice sharp with urgency. "A lead. A real one this time." Grace watched from behind the counter as this powerful man transformed before her eyes. Gone was the polished businessman who'd walked through her door an hour ago. In his place stood a father whose world had just tilted on its axis. "I'll be at your office in 20 minutes. Daniel continued into the phone. "And Mike, this stays between us. No one else gets involved until we know what we're dealing with." He ended the call and turned to Grace, who was still holding Olivia's teddy bear with the reverence one might show a religious artifact. "Mrs. Miller, Grace," he corrected himself, remembering her earlier preference. "I need to know everything about Carmen Brooks. Everything you remember about the day she came in here." Grace nodded slowly, setting the bear down carefully on the counter. "She was broken. That's the only word for it. I've seen a lot of desperate people come through that door, but Carmen was different. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks." Daniel pulled out his phone and started recording. "What time of day was it? Late afternoon? Maybe 4 o'clock. It was getting dark early. You know how October can be." Grace closed her eyes, trying to pull the memory into focus. She kept looking over her shoulder, like someone might be following her. When she put the bear on the counter, she started crying. Not just tears, sobbing like her heart was breaking all over again. What did she say? Her exact words, if you can remember. Grace moved to her filing cabinet and pulled out the receipt, studying Carmen's shaky signature. She said, "I need money fast, my baby. My baby needs me to do this." When I asked if she was sure she wanted to pawn something that was obviously precious to her, she said, "Olivia would understand. She'd want me to survive. Daniel's breath caught. She talked about Olivia in present tense, like she was still alive. I thought it was just grief talking, you know? People say all kinds of things when they're hurting. Grace paused, watching Daniel's face carefully. But there was something else. When I was filling out the paperwork, she got a phone call. She answered it and just said, "I'm handling it. She's safe. I promise she's safe." Then she hung up real quick and seemed nervous that I'd heard. The color drained from Daniel's face. She said, "She's safe." Those were her exact words. At the time, I figured maybe she was talking to a friend or family member, reassuring them about something else entirely. But now, Daniel was already moving toward the door, his mind racing. I have to go. But Grace, please, don't throw that bear away. Don't let anyone take it. It might be the only connection I have left to my daughter. Wait, Grace called after him. Mr. Whitaker, I know this isn't my business, but you should know something else about that day. He stopped, his hand on the door handle. Carmen wasn't just desperate for money. She was terrified. Of what? I don't know. But she kept checking the windows, kept asking if I had a back exit, and when she left. Grace hesitated. What? When she left, what? She didn't head toward the bus stop or the L station. She walked toward the parking garage across the street, but she stopped at least 3 times to look back, like she was making sure no one was following her. Mr. Whitaker, I've been running this place for 15 years. I know the difference between someone who's grieving and someone who's running. Daniel felt the pieces of a puzzle he'd never understood finally beginning to shift into place. For 8 years, he'd lived with the assumption that his daughter had been taken by a stranger, that Carmen's breakdown afterward was the natural response of a mother losing her child. But what if there was more to the story? An hour later, Daniel sat across from Mike Brennan in the private investigator's cluttered office, the teddy bear between them like evidence in a trial that had never been held. "You know I looked into this case for 2 years, Daniel," Mike said, his weathered face serious. "Every lead went nowhere. Every suspect had an alibi. The security footage from the park showed Carmen chasing after someone in a hoodie who was carrying Olivia. But we never got a clear shot of the kidnapper's face. But we never looked at Carmen herself as a suspect," Daniel said quietly. Mike leaned back in his chair. "Because she was the victim, Dan. She was devastated. I watched that woman fall apart in real time. Or she was putting on the performance of her life." Daniel ran his hands through his hair. "Think about it, Mike. The timing was too convenient. Carmen and I had been fighting for months about my work schedule. She threatened to leave, to take Olivia away from me. What if she did exactly that? You're talking about a mother faking her own child's kidnapping. That's a hell of an accusation. Is it crazier than a complete stranger managing to snatch a 4-year-old girl in broad daylight from one of the most monitored parks in Chicago, and then vanishing without a trace?" Daniel's voice was rising. "We've been looking for the wrong person. Mike, we've been looking for a kidnapper when we should have been looking for Carmen." Mike was quiet for a long moment, studying the bear. "If you're right, and I'm saying if, then we need to be very careful about how we proceed. Carmen Brooks officially died in a car accident 6 months after Olivia disappeared. Single car crash, body burned beyond recognition, identified through dental records. Dental records can be faked. Bodies can be planted. Carmen had a sister, didn't she? Evelyn something. Evelyn Brooks, lives in Santa Fe. We interviewed her during the initial investigation. But she hadn't heard from Carmen in months. Said they'd had a falling out over Carmen's drinking and pill problem." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. What if that wasn't a falling out? What if that was Carmen setting up her escape route? Mike pulled out his laptop and started typing. "I'm pulling up everything we have on Evelyn Brooks. Address, employment history, financial records from around the time of the disappearance." He paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Daniel, if you're right about this, if Carmen is alive and has had Olivia all these years, then my daughter is out there somewhere, believing her father abandoned her," Daniel finished. "And I've wasted 8 years mourning instead of searching." The office fell silent, except for the hum of Mike's computer and the distant sounds of Chicago traffic. Daniel stared at the teddy bear, remembering the morning he'd given it to Olivia, how her face had lit up when she'd seen it waiting on her bed. "I was a terrible father, Mike," he said quietly. "I was so focused on building the business, on proving I could be successful, that I forgot why success mattered in the first place. Maybe Carmen was right to take her away from me. "Hey," Mike said firmly, "don't go down that road. If Carmen did this, if she faked Olivia's kidnapping, then she committed a crime. She put you through 8 years of hell. She let the whole world believe your daughter was dead or worse. There's no justification for that, no matter how angry she was." Daniel nodded, but the guilt still sat heavy in his chest. "What's our next move?" "I'm going to make some calls, see what I can find out about Evelyn Brooks's current situation. In the meantime, you should prepare yourself for the possibility that I'm right and you're wrong, that this bear doesn't mean what you think it means. And if you're wrong and I'm right," Mike's expression was grim, "then we're about to turn a lot of lives upside down, including yours." As Daniel left the investigator's office, the teddy bear clutched in his arms. He realized that for the first time in 8 years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten how to feel: hope. It was a dangerous feeling for a man who'd already lost everything once. 3 days later, Daniel sat in Mike Brennan's office staring at a stack of documents that would change everything. The morning sun streamed through the blinds, casting prison bar shadows across papers that told a story 8 years in the making. "You're not going to like what I found," Mike said, sliding a manila folder across the desk. "But you were right to be suspicious." Daniel's hands shook as he opened the folder. Inside were bank records, employment documents, and a series of photographs that made his blood run cold. The first photo showed a woman who looked remarkably like Carmen, but with shorter hair and different clothes, standing outside a small house in Santa Fe. "That was taken 6 months ago," Mike explained. "Evelyn Brooks has been caring for a 12-year-old girl she calls Sophie. Officially, the kid's an orphan. Parents supposedly died in a car crash when she was 4. Olivia," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. "Gets worse. I pulled Evelyn's financial records in September 2016, right after Olivia disappeared. She received a $50,000 life insurance payout for her sister Carmen's death. But here's the kicker. That policy was purchased just 3 months before Carmen supposedly died." Daniel felt the room spinning around him. "Carmen planned this. She planned all of it. There's more." Mike pulled out another document. "I found the death certificate for Carmen Brooks, the dental records used for identification. They belonged to a Jane Doe who'd been in the county morgue for 2 years. Someone with access to the coroner's office switched them. How is that possible? Carmen worked as a medical secretary at Northwestern Memorial before Olivia was born. She'd have known people, had contacts in the system." Mike leaned forward. "Daniel, your ex-wife didn't just fake her death. She orchestrated one of the most elaborate disappearances I've ever seen." Daniel stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. 8 years of guilt. 8 years of wondering what he could have done differently. 8 years of believing he'd failed to protect his daughter. And it had all been a lie. "I need to see her," he said. "I need to see Olivia." "Slow down, Dan. We can't just show up in Santa Fe and demand to see the kid. Legally speaking, Evelyn Brooks is her guardian. And if we're wrong about this, we're not wrong." Daniel turned back to Mike, his eyes blazing with certainty. "Everything fits. Carmen's behavior those last few months, the fights about my work schedule, her threats to take Olivia away. She wasn't making empty threats. She was planning." Mike nodded grimly. "There's something else. I tracked down the doctor who treated Carmen for her addiction issues. Dr. Patricia Reeves at North Shore Medical. She agreed to talk to me off the record. And Carmen was on a cocktail of antidepressants and anxiety medications in the months before the disappearance. But get this. She stopped showing up for appointments 6 weeks before Olivia vanished. Just disappeared from treatment entirely." Daniel sank back into his chair. "She was getting clean, making sure she'd be functional enough to carry out her plan. Doctor, Reeves said something else that stuck with me. She said Carmen had become obsessed with the idea that you were dangerous, that you'd hurt Olivia if pushed too far. The doctor tried to convince her it was the medication talking, but Carmen wouldn't listen. I never laid a hand on either of them," Daniel said quietly. "I know that. You know that. But Carmen's medical records show she was in a serious psychological crisis. Mix that with the pills she was taking, the stress of your marriage falling apart." Mike shrugged. "People in that state can convince themselves of anything." Daniel stared at the photos of the girl who might be his daughter. In one picture, she was laughing as she played in a yard behind Evelyn's house. In another, She was walking to school with a backpack slung over her shoulder. She looked happy, healthy, normal, everything a father would want for his child. Everything except the truth. "I have to go to Santa Fe," Daniel said finally. "I figured you'd say that. And honestly, I think you should, but not alone, and not without a plan." "What do you mean?" Mike pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. "I know someone out there, former FBI agent turned private security. She can help us approach this the right way. Make sure we don't traumatize the kid or give Evelyn a chance to run." Daniel was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been eating at him since Mike's revelations. "What if Olivia doesn't remember me? What if she's been told I'm dead, or worse? Then we deal with that when it happens. But Daniel, she's your daughter. No matter what Carmen told her, no matter how much time has passed, that bond doesn't just disappear." An hour later, Daniel found himself back at Miller's pawn shop. Grace was behind the counter, carefully wrapping items in newspaper as she prepared for the final closure. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, looking up in surprise, "I didn't expect to see you again." "I found her," Daniel said simply. "I found Olivia." Grace's hands stilled on the package she was wrapping. "Oh my God. Is she... She's alive. She's been living with Carmen's sister in New Mexico this whole time." Daniel's voice was steady, but Grace could see the storm of emotions behind his eyes. Carmen faked her own death and disappeared with Olivia 8 years ago. Grace sank into the chair behind the counter. "That poor child and you. All this time you thought. I know this might sound crazy, but I need to ask you something." Daniel stepped closer to the counter. "I'm flying to Santa Fe tomorrow to find my daughter, but I can't do this alone. Olivia doesn't know me, probably doesn't even remember me. She's going to be terrified when she finds out who I am. What are you asking? Come with me. Help me talk to her. You have a way with people, Grace. I saw it the other day when you helped me process all this, and you were there when Carmen pawned the bear. You're a connection to that time, to the truth." Grace blinked in surprise. "Mr. Whitaker, I barely know you, and this is your family situation. Please," Daniel interrupted. "I'll pay for everything. Your flight, hotel, whatever you need. I can't face her alone, not after what I've put her through. You didn't put her through anything, her mother did. But I drove Carmen to it, didn't I? My obsession with work, my failure as a husband and father, if I'd been present, if I'd paid attention to what was happening in my own home." Grace studied his face, seeing not the ruthless businessman who'd walked into her shop a few days ago, but a broken man who'd lost 8 years with his child. She thought about her own son, Ethan, how she'd moved heaven and earth to give him a good life after his father left. She understood the desperation of a parent who'd do anything for their child. "If I come with you," she said slowly, "we do this right. No charging in like some action movie. We think about that little girl first. What's best for her." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much. Don't thank me yet. We don't know what we're walking into out there. Carmen might not be as dead as we think. Evelyn might run when she sees us coming. And Olivia," Grace paused, "Olivia might not want anything to do with you." "I know," Daniel said quietly, "but I have to try. She's my daughter, Grace. She's all I have left." As Grace looked at this powerful man reduced to his most vulnerable state, she realized that some journeys were too important to take alone, and sometimes, the most unlikely people became the bridges that could span the deepest chasms of loss. Tomorrow, they would fly into the New Mexico desert to find a girl who had been lost for 8 years. Whether they would find redemption or more heartbreak remained to be seen. But for the first time since Olivia's disappearance, Daniel Whitaker wasn't facing the unknown alone. The adobe house sat like a mirage against the New Mexico sky, its terracotta walls glowing in the late afternoon sun. Daniel gripped the steering wheel of their rental car so tightly his knuckles had gone white, while Grace sat beside him, equally tense but trying to project calm. "Remember what we discussed," Grace said softly. "We're not here to take her away. We're here to understand." Daniel nodded, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Somewhere behind those walls was his daughter, a girl who'd been 4 when he last held her, now 12 and believing herself an orphan. They'd spent the morning with Agent Sarah Chen, Mike's contact in Santa Fe, planning their approach. The strategy was simple: introduce themselves as friends of Carmen's who had questions about her death. If the girl was indeed Olivia, they'd know soon enough. "You ready for this?" Grace asked, though she could see Daniel was anything but ready. "No," he admitted, "but I can't wait any longer." They walked up the gravel path together, past a small garden where desert flowers bloomed in defiant splashes of color. Daniel's hands shook as he raised them to knock on the weathered wooden door. The woman who answered was clearly Carmen's sister. The same dark hair, the same gentle eyes, though these were filled with immediate suspicion when she saw strangers on her doorstep. "Ms. Brooks," Grace stepped forward, offering her most reassuring smile. "I'm Grace Miller, and this is Daniel. We were hoping we could talk to you about your sister Carmen." Evelyn's face went carefully blank. "Carmen's been dead for almost 8 years. We know this might be difficult," Grace continued, "but we were friends of hers in Chicago. We just learned about her accident, and we wanted to pay our respects." "I don't know what you're talking about," Evelyn said, starting to close the door. "And I don't appreciate strangers showing up at my home. Please," Daniel spoke for the first time, his voice rough with emotion. "We just want to talk. About Carmen. About what happened to her daughter." That stopped Evelyn cold. Her grip on the door tightened, and Grace could see fear flickering in her eyes. "Carmen didn't have a daughter," Evelyn said carefully. "Aunt Evie, who's at the door." The voice came from inside the house. Young, curious, innocent. Daniel's breath caught in his throat as a girl appeared beside Evelyn, peering around her aunt's protective stance. The world stopped, even at 12. Even with her hair longer and her face more mature, Daniel knew immediately. The same green eyes he saw in the mirror every morning. The same stubborn set to her chin that had reminded him so much of himself when she was little. The same small scar above her left eyebrow from when she'd fallen off her tricycle at age 3. "Olivia," he whispered, the name escaping him like a prayer. The girl looked confused. "I'm sorry. My name's Sophie. I think you have me confused with someone else." But Evelyn had gone pale as death, her protective arm tightening around the girl's shoulders. "Sophie, go inside now." "But Aunt Evie." "Now!" Evelyn's voice was sharp with panic. Sophie, Olivia, looked hurt by her aunt's tone, but she obediently stepped back into the house. Daniel could hear her footsteps retreating down a hallway. "You need to leave," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "Right now." "Ms. Brooks," Grace said gently. "We're not here to cause trouble, but that girl, Sophie, she's not your niece, is she? She's Carmen's daughter. She's Olivia Whitaker." Evelyn's composure cracked. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm her father," Daniel said simply. The words hung in the desert air like a thunderclap. Evelyn stared at him for a long moment, her face cycling through emotions. Recognition, fear, guilt, and something that might have been relief. "Oh God," she whispered. "You're him. You're Daniel." "You knew," Daniel said, and it wasn't a question. "You knew who she was all along." Evelyn's legs seemed to give out, and she leaned heavily against the doorframe. "Carmen said you were dangerous. She said you'd hurt Sophie if you ever found her. She made me promise to protect her, to never let anyone know who she really was. I would never hurt my daughter." Daniel's voice was thick with 8 years of pain. "Never. But Carmen said, she said you had a temper, that you'd threaten them. She was so scared, so broken, when she showed up here with Sophie, telling me you'd both died in an accident." Evelyn's voice trailed off as the full weight of the deception hit her. Grace stepped forward carefully. "Evelyn, Carmen lied to you. She faked her own death and took Olivia, Sophie, to keep her away from Daniel. But Daniel never hurt them. He's been searching for his daughter for 8 years. No." Evelyn shook her head frantically. "That can't be right. Carmen wouldn't. She loved Sophie so much. Everything she did was to protect her. Where is Carmen now?" Daniel asked quietly. Evelyn's face crumpled. She left 6 months after bringing Sophie here. Said it wasn't safe for her to stay, that people might be looking for her. She promised she'd come back, but..." Evelyn wiped tears from her eyes. "I never heard from her again. I've been raising Sophie alone ever since." The implications hit Daniel like a physical blow. Carmen had abandoned Olivia twice, once by faking the kidnapping, and again by leaving her with Evelyn and disappearing. "Sophie doesn't know, does she?" Grace asked gently. "She doesn't know who she really is. Carmen made me promise never to tell her. She said it would be too dangerous, that if Sophie knew the truth, bad people might find her. Evelyn looked up at Daniel with eyes full of guilt. I thought I was protecting her. All these years, I thought I was keeping her safe. From inside the house, they could hear Sophie calling out, Aunt Evie, is everything okay? You sound upset. Daniel's heart broke at the sound of his daughter's voice, concerned, caring, protective of the woman she thought was her only family. I want to see her, Daniel said. I want to talk to her. No. Evelyn stepped protectively in front of the door. You can't just show up and destroy her whole world. She's been through enough. She's my daughter. Daniel's voice rose slightly, then caught himself. Grace put a calming hand on his arm. She's also a 12-year-old girl who believes her parents are dead, Grace said softly. Evelyn's right. We can't just drop this on her without thinking it through. Then what do you suggest? Daniel asked, his frustration evident before anyone could answer. Sophie appeared in the doorway again, this time moving past Evelyn, despite her aunt's protests. Aunt Evie, you're crying, she said, her young face filled with concern. What's wrong? Who are these people? She looked directly at Daniel, and for a moment, just a moment, he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Recognition, confusion. He couldn't tell. We're friends of your aunt's, Grace said gently. We were just having a difficult conversation about someone we all knew a long time ago. Sophie studied them both with the careful attention of a child who'd learned to read adult emotions for signs of danger. You look sad, she said to Daniel. Were you friends with my parents before they died? Daniel's throat closed up entirely. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Yes, Grace answered for him. We knew them. They were very good people. Sophie nodded solemnly. I don't remember them very much. I was really little when the accident happened, but Aunt Evie tells me stories about them sometimes. Daniel felt tears streaming down his face, and Sophie noticed. I'm sorry, she said with the earnest sympathy only children possessed. It must be hard, missing them. Yes, Daniel managed to whisper. It is. As they stood there in the doorway, father and daughter separated by 8 years of lies and the width of a threshold, Daniel realized that finding Olivia had been the easy part. Learning how to be her father again would be the challenge of his lifetime. 2 weeks had passed since that devastating first encounter, and Daniel had rented a small apartment 3 blocks from Evelyn's house. Each morning, he walked past the adobe home where his daughter lived, hoping for a glimpse of her heading to school, trying to work up the courage for another conversation. Grace had stayed, much to his surprise and gratitude. She'd extended her leave from the pawn shop closure indefinitely, claiming she needed time to figure out her next steps anyway. But Daniel knew the truth. She'd seen how broken he was after that first meeting and couldn't bring herself to leave him alone. You can't keep doing this, Grace said as she joined him on his morning walk, standing across the street like some kind of stalker. It's not healthy, and if Evelyn sees you, she'll think you're proving Carmen's point about you being dangerous. Daniel stopped walking and leaned against a street lamp. I don't know how to do this, Grace. How do you approach a child who doesn't know you exist? How do you explain that everything she believes about her life is a lie? Carefully, Grace said, and with help. That afternoon, Grace knocked on Evelyn's door alone. She'd convinced Daniel to stay at the apartment, arguing that Evelyn might be more receptive to a conversation with another woman. I'm not changing my mind, Evelyn said immediately upon seeing Grace. Sophie doesn't need to know about any of this. May I come in, just to talk? Not about Daniel, not about the past, about Sophie's future. Evelyn hesitated, then stepped aside. The house was warm and comfortable, filled with pictures of Sophie at various ages. Birthday parties, school events, family outings. Grace noticed there were no photos of Sophie before age 4. You love her, Grace observed, studying a picture of Sophie and Evelyn at what looked like a science fair. She's my daughter in every way that matters, Evelyn said firmly. I've raised her for 8 years. I'm the only mother she remembers. I'm not trying to take that away from you. But Evelyn, she has a father who's been mourning her for 8 years. A father who thought she was dead. Carmen said he was abusive, that he had a violent temper. Grace sat down on the couch, choosing her words carefully. Did you ever see evidence of that? When Carmen was married to him? Did you see bruises? Did she tell you specific stories about him hurting her or Sophie? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. No, she admitted. But Carmen was so scared. She wouldn't have made something like that up. Carmen was also severely depressed and on multiple medications. People in that state can sometimes misinterpret situations. Are you saying my sister was crazy? I'm saying your sister was sick. And when people are that sick, sometimes they make decisions that seem rational to them, but aren't based in reality. From down the hall came the sound of Sophie practicing violin, a hauntingly beautiful melody that made Grace's heart ache. She's talented, Grace said. Gets it from Carmen. Music was always her escape. Evelyn's voice softened. Sophie doesn't know, but sometimes when she plays, I catch glimpses of her mother in her expressions, her posture. What else does she get from Carmen? Or from Daniel? Evelyn looked uncomfortable with the question. She's stubborn like Carmen was, but she's also logical, analytical. She loves math and science, always asking how things work. She paused. Carmen hated math. Daniel's a civil engineer, built his whole company on mathematical precision. Don't, Evelyn warned. Don't try to make me see him in her. I'm not trying to make you see anything that isn't already there. Grace leaned forward. Evelyn, what if I told you Daniel just wants to know she's okay? What if he doesn't want to disrupt her life, just wants to be sure she's happy and healthy? I'd say that's not how custody battles work. Once he proves who she is, he'll take her away from me. What if he promised not to? What if he legally agreed that you could remain her guardian, that he just wanted to be part of her life? Evelyn stared at Grace for a long moment. You really believe he's changed? That he's not the man Carmen was afraid of? I think he's a man who's spent 8 years realizing what really matters. And I think Carmen was a woman who was too sick to see clearly what was real and what was fear. The violin music stopped, and they could hear Sophie's footsteps in the hallway. Aunt Evie, can I have a snack? Sophie appeared in the doorway, violin still in hand. She saw Grace and smiled politely. Oh, hi. You're the lady who was here before, aren't you? I am Grace Miller. I heard you playing. You're very talented. Sophie beamed. Thank you. I've been working on this piece for months. It's really complicated, but I like the challenge. What's it called? Canon in D. It's by Pachelbel, do you know it? Grace's breath caught. Canon in D had been the song playing when Daniel first told her about Olivia. The song that had been playing in the background of the video he'd shown her of Olivia's 4th birthday party. I do know it, Grace said softly. It's beautiful. Aunt Evie says my mom used to play it too before I was born. I don't really remember her playing, but sometimes when I play this song, I feel like maybe she's listening. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, and Grace understood why. Sophie was talking about Carmen, but she was playing Daniel's song, the song that had been special to her biological parents, even if she didn't know it. I'm sure she is listening, Grace said, and I'm sure she's very proud. After Sophie went to the kitchen for her snack, Evelyn turned to Grace with new resolve in her eyes. If Daniel wants to meet her properly, he needs to understand the rules. This is her home. I'm her guardian. And we tell her the truth slowly, carefully, in a way that doesn't destroy her sense of security. He'll agree to anything, Grace said immediately. And he needs to prove to me that he's not the man Carmen described. Not through words, but through actions. That evening, Grace found Daniel sitting on a bench in the small park across from Sophie's school, watching kids play on the playground where his daughter spent her recess. Evelyn wants to meet with you, Grace said, sitting beside him. But there are conditions. I'll take whatever conditions she sets. Daniel, she's going to test you. She's going to want to see that you can put Sophie's needs above your own desire to have your daughter back. Sophie. Daniel repeated the name slowly. 8 years, and she's been Sophie Brooks instead of Olivia Whitaker. Names can be changed back, but trust, once it's broken, is much harder to repair. Daniel was quiet for a moment, watching a group of children playing tag. What if she never wants to know me? What if, when she learns the truth, she chooses to stay Sophie Brooks forever? Then you'll love her enough to let her make that choice. How do you know so much about this? About being a parent? Grace smiled sadly. My son Ethan's father left when he was 3. I spent years wondering if I should try to find him, if Ethan deserved to know his father. But then I realized that what Ethan deserved was a parent who put his needs first. Always. Everything else was just adult drama. Did you ever find him? Ethan's father? No, and I'm okay with that, because Ethan had what he needed. He had me, and I had him. Family isn't always about blood, Daniel. Sometimes it's about who shows up. Daniel looked at Grace, really looked at her, for the first time since they'd met. He saw strength in the set of her shoulders, wisdom in her eyes, and something else he was afraid to name. You've been showing up, he said quietly. For me, for this situation. Why? Grace was quiet for a long moment. Because 8 years ago, I was standing in my pawn shop watching desperate people trade their memories for survival. And I always wondered what happened to them after they left. Now I know. Some of them were just trying to find their way back home. As they sat together in the fading New Mexico sunlight, Daniel realized that finding Olivia was only the beginning of his journey. Learning to be her father again, and figuring out what family meant after 8 years of loss, would be the real challenge. But for the first time since this all began, he didn't feel like he was facing it alone. The Desert Springs Rehabilitation Center sat like a fortress against the Arizona mountains, its stark white walls reflecting the harsh morning sun. Daniel gripped the steering wheel as he and Grace sat in the parking lot, both staring at the building that housed the woman who had destroyed and defined the last 8 years of his life. You don't have to do this, Grace said quietly. Mike's investigator confirmed Carmen is here. That's enough for the custody case. No, Daniel shook his head. I need to understand why. I need to hear it from her. It had taken Mike's contacts 3 days to track Carmen down. She wasn't dead, as the world believed, but she might as well have been. After leaving Olivia with Evelyn, Carmen had spiraled into a darkness so deep that even her carefully constructed new identity couldn't save her. She'd been found unconscious in a Phoenix motel room 2 years ago, overdosed on pills and alcohol, with no ID and no memory of her real name. The state had committed her to Desert Springs, where she'd slowly pieced together fragments of her fractured mind. But according to her doctor, Carmen Brooks, or Sarah Martinez, as she'd been calling herself, still lived in a haze of guilt and medication that made reliable conversation difficult. Mr. Whitaker, a middle-aged woman in scrubs, approached their car. I'm Dr. Patricia Gonzalez. We spoke on the phone. Daniel and Grace followed her through sterile corridors that smelled of disinfectant and despair. Other patients shuffled past in institutional clothing, their eyes holding the hollow look of people who'd lost their way back to themselves. I need to prepare you, Dr. Gonzalez said as they walked. Carmen's been here almost 2 years, and she's made significant progress, but she still experiences episodes of dissociation and severe depression. Learning about your presence, about what really happened to her daughter, could trigger a serious setback. I understand, Daniel said, though his jaw was clenched tight. But she took my daughter from me. She let me believe Olivia was dead for 8 years. I think I'm entitled to some answers. Dr. Gonzalez stopped walking and turned to face him. Mr. Whitaker, the woman you're about to see isn't the same person who disappeared with your daughter. Mental illness, addiction, and trauma have taken their toll. Whatever anger you're carrying, it won't help her heal, and it won't bring back the time you lost. Grace put a calming hand on Daniel's arm. We're not here for revenge, Doctor. We just need to understand. They entered a small visiting room with barred windows and plastic chairs. Carmen sat at a table, her once beautiful dark hair now streaked with premature gray, her face gaunt from years of medication and poor self-care. When she looked up and saw Daniel, her reaction was immediate and devastating. No, she whispered, shrinking back in her chair. No, you can't be here. They promised you couldn't find me. Carmen, Daniel said, his voice surprisingly gentle. I'm not here to hurt you. That's what you always said. Carmen's voice was childlike, broken. Before you'd lose your temper, before you'd yell and throw things and make Olivia cry. Daniel felt like he'd been slapped. I never threw things. I never made Olivia cry. You did. Carmen's voice rose to a shriek. You were always angry, always working, always leaving us alone. And when I tried to talk to you about it, you'd get that look in your eyes, that dangerous look. Grace leaned forward carefully. Carmen, I'm Grace. I'm a friend. Can you tell me about the dangerous look? Carmen's attention shifted to Grace, and some of the panic left her eyes. He'd get quiet, cold, like he was calculating how much damage he could do without anyone noticing. She wrapped her arms around herself protectively. I knew he'd hurt Olivia eventually. I had to save her. Carmen, Daniel's voice was thick with 8 years of pain. I never hurt you. I never hurt Olivia. I would have died before laying a hand on either of you. Liar. Carmen slammed her hands on the table. You wanted to send me away. To that place with the white rooms and the doctors who asked too many questions. Daniel exchanged a glance with Grace. The psychiatric facility, he said quietly. Carmen, you were having panic attacks, taking pills, drinking. I suggested therapy, not commitment. Same thing, Carmen muttered. You wanted me gone so you could have Olivia all to yourself, but I saved her. I saved my baby girl. You took her away from her father, Grace said gently. You made her believe she was an orphan. Better an orphan than dead. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. Do you know what it's like to live with a man who could snap at any moment? To watch your daughter flinch every time he raises his voice. I never raised my voice to Olivia, Daniel said desperately. Carmen, please, try to remember clearly. When did I ever hurt her? Carmen was quiet for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. You yelled at me about the bills, about my prescriptions, about how I was weak and useless and making everything harder. I was worried about you. Daniel's voice cracked. You were taking pills during the day, drinking at night. I was scared you'd hurt yourself, or accidentally hurt Olivia. I didn't know how to help you. You wanted to lock me up. I wanted you to get better. Same thing, Carmen repeated, but with less conviction this time. Dr. Gonzalez had been taking notes throughout the conversation. Carmen, we've talked about this before. Sometimes when we're very sick, our minds can change our memories to match our fears instead of what really happened. Are you saying I imagined it? Carmen's voice was small, frightened. I'm saying trauma and medication can make it hard to tell the difference between what we fear might happen and what actually did happen, the doctor replied carefully. Carmen looked at Daniel with confusion in her eyes. But I was so scared, so sure you were dangerous. You were sick, Daniel said gently, and I didn't know how to help you. I was working all the time because I thought providing for you both was what a good husband and father did. I didn't realize you needed me to be present more than you needed me to be successful. I tried to tell you, Carmen whispered. I tried to say I was drowning. I know. And I'm sorry I didn't listen better. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Carmen's quiet crying. When she finally looked up, her eyes were clearer than they'd been since Daniel arrived. Where is she? Carmen asked. Where's Olivia? She's safe, Grace answered. She's with your sister Evelyn in Santa Fe. She's been calling herself Sophie. Sophie. Carmen smiled through her tears. That was going to be her middle name, before everything went wrong. She looked at Daniel. Is she happy? She seems to be. She plays violin, does well in school. Evelyn loves her very much. Does she remember me? Daniel hesitated. She remembers you as her mother who died when she was 4. Carmen, she doesn't know the truth about any of this. Carmen's face crumpled. She thinks I'm dead. She thinks we're both dead, Daniel said quietly. Evelyn told her we died in a car accident. Oh God. Carmen buried her face in her hands. What did I do? What did I do to my baby? We're going to figure this out, Grace said firmly. All of us together. But Carmen, Olivia needs stability now. She needs to know that the adults in her life are going to put her needs first. Carmen looked up at Daniel with an expression he hadn't seen in years. Lucid. Present. Real. Do you hate me? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I did. For a long time. I hated you more than I thought possible. But sitting here now, seeing how sick you were, he shook his head. I just want our daughter to be okay. She's not really mine anymore. Is she? Carmen's voice was barely a whisper. She'll always be your daughter, Daniel said. But Carmen, you need to get well, really well, before you can be part of her life again. Carmen nodded slowly. Will you tell her about me? When you tell her the truth, we'll tell her that her mother loved her so much. She did what she thought was right to protect her, and that her mother is working very hard to get better. As they prepared to leave, Carmen called out one last time. "Daniel, I'm sorry. For all of it. I'm so sorry." Daniel paused at the door. "I'm sorry too, Carmen, for not being the husband and father you both needed." Outside in the parking lot, Grace and Daniel sat in silence as the Arizona sun beat down on their car. "Do you believe her?" Grace asked finally. "About why she did it?" "I believe she believed it," Daniel said. "And maybe that's enough for now." 3 weeks after the visit to Carmen, Daniel had established a careful routine in Santa Fe. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he would visit Evelyn's house for an hour. Sitting in the living room while Sophie did homework or practiced violin, the conversations were stilted, careful, like two strangers trying to find common ground across a minefield of unspoken truths. Sophie had accepted his presence with the adaptability of childhood, though she still called him Mr. Daniel and maintained a polite distance. Evelyn supervised every interaction, watching for signs of the dangerous man Carmen had described, but finding instead a father trying desperately to connect with a daughter who didn't know she was his. Grace had become the bridge between them all, helping Daniel navigate the delicate process of building trust while supporting Evelyn through her own crisis of faith. Everything Evelyn had believed about her sister, about Sophie's history, about her role as protector, had been turned upside down. On this particular Thursday afternoon, Sophie was struggling with a math problem, her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked through equations that would have challenged students twice her age. "I don't understand why we need to find X," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. "What's the point if X could be anything?" Daniel, who had been sitting quietly on the opposite end of the couch, leaned forward slightly. "May I see?" Sophie glanced at Evelyn, who nodded reluctantly. She handed the worksheet to Daniel, their fingers briefly touching. The contact sent a jolt through Daniel's heart. The first time he'd touched his daughter in 8 years. "Ah, algebra," Daniel said, studying the problems. "You know, when I was your age, I thought the same thing. Why should I care about some mystery number?" "Exactly." Sophie's eyes lit up with vindication. "But then I realized that X isn't really a mystery. It's a puzzle. And once you solve it, you know something you didn't know before." Daniel pulled out a pen. "Mind if I show you?" For the next 20 minutes, Daniel walked Sophie through the problems, his engineering background making the complex concepts accessible. Grace watched from the kitchen doorway, noting how Sophie leaned closer to him as they worked, how her defensive posture gradually relaxed. "You're really good at this," Sophie said when they finished the last problem. "Are you a teacher?" "I'm an engineer," Daniel replied. "I build things, bridges mostly, like the Golden Gate Bridge. Not quite that famous, but yes, that kind of thing." Sophie studied his face with new interest. "I love bridges. There's something beautiful about connecting two places that were separate before." Daniel's breath caught. That's a very wise way to think about it. Aunt Evie says I get my logical thinking from my dad. He was good with numbers too before he died." Sophie's voice grew soft and sad. The room fell silent. Evelyn looked stricken, realizing what Sophie had just said, and to whom. Grace stepped forward, sensing the emotional landmine they'd just stepped on. "Sophie," Grace said gently, "can I ask you something? What do you remember about your parents?" "Not much," Sophie shrugged. "I was really little when they died. Just feelings. Mostly, I remember feeling safe and someone singing to me at bedtime. And I remember a man with a deep voice who used to carry me on his shoulders." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He remembered those moments, singing, "You Are My Sunshine," while rocking her to sleep, carrying her around the house, pretending to be a giant, while she giggled and held onto his hair. "Do you ever wonder about them?" Grace continued carefully. "About what they were like?" "Sometimes," Sophie admitted. "Aunt Evie tells me stories." "But," she hesitated, glancing at Evelyn, "sometimes I feel like there are pieces missing, like there's something I should remember but can't." Evelyn looked panicked. "Sophie, honey, maybe we should—" "It's okay, Aunt Evie," Sophie said with surprising maturity. "I know you're trying to protect me, but sometimes I dream about things that feel real. You know, like memories that don't match the stories." "What kind of dreams?" Daniel asked, his voice carefully neutral. "There's this one I have sometimes. I'm little, maybe 3 or 4, and I'm in a big kitchen with yellow walls. There's a man there, and he's making pancakes, but he's flipping them really high in the air and catching them in the pan. I'm laughing so hard I can barely breathe. Sophie smiled at the memory. The man has kind eyes, and when he looks at me, I feel like I'm the most important person in the world. Daniel's composure shattered. The yellow kitchen had been his pride and joy in their Chicago house. Sunday morning pancakes had been their tradition. He would flip them higher and higher while Olivia shrieked with delight. "Sophie," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That wasn't a dream." "What?" Sophie looked confused. Grace and Evelyn exchanged glances. This wasn't how they'd planned to tell her, but the moment had arrived whether they were ready or not. "Daniel," Evelyn said quietly, "maybe we should wait." "No," Daniel said firmly. "She's asking questions. She deserves answers." He turned to Sophie, whose face had gone very serious. "Sophie, that memory you have, it's real. Those pancakes, that kitchen, that man who made you feel important, that was real. But how do you know?" Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. Daniel reached into his wallet and pulled out a worn photograph, the only picture of him and Olivia he carried everywhere. It showed a younger Daniel in a yellow kitchen, tossing a pancake in the air, while a 4-year-old girl with pigtails clapped her hands in delight. Sophie stared at the photo, her face pale. That's my dream, but that's not me. That little girl has pigtails. I never had pigtails." "You did," Daniel said gently. "You hated them, but your mother insisted they kept your hair out of your face." "Mr. Daniel," Sophie's voice was shaking now, "why do you have a picture of my dream?" Daniel looked at Evelyn, who nodded reluctantly, tears streaming down her face. "Because it's not a dream, Sophie. It's a memory. And that little girl in the picture, that's you." Sophie shook her head frantically. "No, that's impossible. My name is Sophie Brooks. My parents died in a car accident when I was 4. Aunt Evie told me." "Your aunt believed what she was told," Daniel said carefully. "But Sophie, your real name is Olivia Whitaker, and I'm not Mr. Daniel. I'm your father." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Sophie stared at him, then at the photograph, then at Evelyn, whose guilty expression confirmed everything. "You're lying," Sophie said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I wish I were," Daniel said. "Sophie, Olivia, 8 years ago, your mother took you away from me. She was very sick, and she believed I was dangerous, though I never was. She staged your disappearance and brought you here to live with Evelyn, telling everyone we were both dead. But why? Why would she do that? Because she loved you so much, and she was so scared that she convinced herself she was protecting you from something that was never really a threat." Sophie looked at Evelyn with betrayal in her eyes. "Did you know, all these years, did you know who I really was?" Evelyn was sobbing now. "I thought I was protecting you. Your mother made me promise never to tell you the truth. She said it would be dangerous if anyone found out who you really were. So everything is a lie." Sophie's voice rose to a shout. "My name, my history, my dead parents, all of it is a lie." "Not all of it," Daniel said quickly. "Your mother's love for you was real. Evelyn's love for you is real. And Sophie, my love for you, that was real 8 years ago, and it's real now." Sophie stood up abruptly, backing away from all of them. "I don't believe you. I don't believe any of this. My parents are dead. I saw their graves." "Those graves are empty, sweetheart," Evelyn said through her tears. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." Sophie ran from the room, her footsteps pounding down the hallway before a door slammed shut. The 3 adults sat in devastated silence, listening to the sound of muffled crying coming from her bedroom. "That didn't go well," Grace said finally. "How else could it have gone?" Daniel asked, his face in his hands. "Her entire life is a lie. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her family. None of it's true." "It's true," Evelyn said fiercely. "I raised her. I loved her. That's true. But you're not her mother," Daniel said quietly. "And no matter how much you love her, you can't change the fact that she has a father who's been mourning her for 8 years. From down the hall came the sound of Sophie's violin, but the music was different now. Harsh, angry, discordant. She was playing out her pain, and the sound broke all their hearts. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked. Daniel wiped his eyes and stood up. "Now I try to earn the right to be her father again, and we all try to help her understand that sometimes the people who love us make terrible mistakes. But that doesn't mean the love wasn't real." The music from Sophie's room continued. A 12-year-old girl processing the destruction of everything she thought she knew about herself, one agonizing note at a time. 6 months had passed since the devastating truth had been revealed to Sophie, and the small apartment Daniel rented had become a second home filled with tentative conversations and careful rebuilding. The angry violin music had eventually given way to curious questions, then gradual acceptance, and finally, something that looked cautiously like trust. Sophie had chosen to keep using the name she'd grown up with, explaining that Olivia felt like someone else's life. Daniel had agreed immediately, understanding that his daughter needed to control what pieces of her identity she reclaimed and when. "I want to see Chicago," Sophie announced one Thursday afternoon as they worked on a science project together. "I want to see the yellow kitchen." Daniel's hands stilled on the poster board they were decorating. "Are you sure? It might be overwhelming." "I'm sure." Sophie's voice had the determined quality he was learning to recognize, the same stubborn streak that had once driven Carmen to distraction. "I need to see where I came from, to understand who Olivia was, so I can figure out who Sophie wants to be." That evening, Daniel called Grace, who had returned to Chicago 2 months earlier to settle her own affairs but stayed in constant contact. "She wants to come home," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "How do you feel about that?" Grace asked. Terrified, grateful, overwhelmed. Daniel paused. "Grace, what if she sees the house and remembers things that make her hate me? What if being there makes her realize how much she lost? Then you'll deal with that together. Daniel, you've spent the last 6 months proving to her that you're someone she can trust. That doesn't disappear just because you change locations." Grace had news of her own to share. "I've been working on something while you've been in Santa Fe. Remember the pawn shop building you were going to demolish?" "Of course. I convinced the city to let me lease it instead. I'm turning it into a community center for families in crisis, job training, counseling services, after-school programs. Places where people can get help before they have to pawn their wedding rings to survive." Daniel felt a warmth spread through his chest. "Grace, that's incredible. But how are you funding it?" "Well," Grace's voice held a smile. "I know this successful developer who's decided his company should invest more in community outreach programs." 2 weeks later, Daniel, Sophie, and Evelyn stood in the doorway of the house Daniel had abandoned 8 years earlier. He'd kept paying the mortgage, unable to sell the place where his daughter had lived, but unable to live there himself. It had become a shrine to his guilt and loss. Now, seeing it through Sophie's eyes, he realized how much work it would need to become a home again. "It's bigger than I remembered," Sophie said quietly, stepping into the foyer. The yellow kitchen was visible from where they stood, exactly as she'd described in her dreams. Evelyn hung back, still struggling with her role in this new family dynamic. She'd agreed to move to Chicago to stay close to Sophie, but the adjustment had been difficult for all of them. "Can I go upstairs?" Sophie asked. "I want to see my old room." Daniel nodded, following her up the stairs that creaked with familiar sounds. The door to what had been Olivia's nursery, then her little girl's room, stood slightly ajar. Sophie pushed it open and gasped. Daniel had left everything exactly as it was the day she disappeared. The bed with its princess comforter, the bookshelf full of picture books, the toy chest overflowing with stuffed animals. "You kept it all," Sophie whispered. "I couldn't bear to change anything. I kept hoping." Daniel's voice trailed off. Sophie walked to the dresser where a music box sat, a gift from her 3rd birthday. She wound it up and watched the tiny ballerina spin while Fur-Elise played in tinkling notes. "I remember this," she said. "And that." She pointed to a rocking chair in the corner. "You used to read to me there. Every night," Daniel confirmed. "Same chair, same spot." Sophie picked up a stuffed elephant from the bed, holding it against her chest. "Mr. Peanuts? I remember him." She looked at Daniel with tears in her eyes. "Why did I have to forget all this? Why couldn't Mom have just talked to you instead of taking me away? Your mother was very sick." "Sophie, when people are that sick, sometimes their fears become bigger than their ability to think clearly. Do you miss her? Even after what she did? Daniel considered the question carefully. I miss the woman she was before she got sick, and I'm sad that her illness kept her from getting the help she needed to be the mother you deserved. Downstairs, they found Grace waiting in the kitchen with takeout bags and a bottle of sparkling cider. I thought we should celebrate, Grace said, setting the food on the counter. Sophie's first dinner in her first home, as they ate around the kitchen table. Sophie asked the question Daniel had been dreading. Are you and Grace going to get married? Daniel nearly choked on his food. Sophie, we haven't. It's okay, Sophie said matter-of-factly. I can tell you love each other, and Grace has been like a mom to me through all this. I wouldn't mind if she became my stepmom officially. Grace blushed deeply. Sophie, your father and I care about each other very much, but we wanted to make sure you were comfortable with any changes we might make. Daniel finished. You've been through enough upheaval for one lifetime. I like Grace, Sophie said simply. She makes you smile the way you do in the old pictures, and she makes me feel safe. She paused. Mom's getting better, isn't she, in that place in Arizona? She is, Daniel nodded. Dr. Gonzalez says she's been asking about you. She wants to write you a letter. When you're ready to read it, what would she say? Probably that she's sorry, and that she loves you, and that she hopes someday you can forgive her. Sophie was quiet for a moment. I think I already forgive her. I mean, I'm still mad about the lying and the fake graves and everything. But I understand why she thought she was protecting me. Daniel reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. You're very wise for 12 years old. 13 next month, Sophie corrected. And I want to have my birthday party here, in this house, with Aunt Evie and Grace and maybe some kids from my new school. She hesitated. And maybe Mom could call in from Arizona if the doctors think she's ready. I think that could be arranged, Daniel said, his heart full, later that evening, after Evelyn had gone to the hotel and Sophie was asleep in her old room. Daniel and Grace sat on the back porch looking at the Chicago skyline. She asked if we were getting married, Daniel said. I heard, Grace replied. What did you think about her question? I thought about how 8 years ago, I had everything and didn't appreciate it. And now I have a second chance at happiness, and I don't want to waste it. Grace turned to look at him. Is that a proposal? It's a conversation starter, Daniel said with a smile. Grace Miller, you saved my life. You helped me find my daughter, helped me become the father she needed. You turned my guilt into purpose and my despair into hope. You did the same for me, Grace said softly. I was ready to give up on everything when you walked into my pawn shop. You reminded me that some things are worth fighting for. So what do you say? Want to build a bridge between your life and mine? Make something permanent out of this beautiful accident we stumbled into. Grace kissed him softly as the lights of Chicago twinkled around them. I say yes, but Daniel, yeah, we're doing this right. With therapy for all of us, honest conversations with Sophie, and a real partnership where we put the kids first. Kids? Well, Ethan's graduating high school next year, and Sophie's going to need a college fund. We're about to become a very blended family. Daniel laughed, pulling her closer. Bring it on. After everything we've been through, I think we can handle whatever comes next. Above them, Sophie's bedroom light was still on. She was writing in the journal Grace had given her, processing the strange and wonderful turn her life had taken. Tomorrow, she would start at a new school with her real name and her real history. It would be complicated and sometimes difficult, but for the first time in 8 years, she would go to sleep knowing exactly who she was and exactly who loved her. And that, Sophie thought, as she finally turned off the light, was worth all the complicated parts. Snow was falling softly outside the windows of the Whitaker house as Sophie hung ornaments on the Christmas tree, each one carrying a memory she was actively choosing to reclaim. The house bustled with an energy it hadn't felt in nearly 9 years, filled with voices, laughter, and the complex dynamics of a family learning how to be whole again. Higher, Ethan, Sophie called to Grace's 18-year-old son, who was perched on a ladder trying to place the star on top of the tree. It's crooked. Everything's crooked to you, perfectionist, Ethan teased, but he adjusted the star anyway. In the 6 months since Grace and Daniel's engagement, he and Sophie had developed the easy banter of siblings who'd chosen each other rather than been born to it. Grace emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of hot chocolate. her engagement ring catching the light from the Christmas tree. "Evelyn's flight lands in 2 hours," she announced, and Dr. Gonzalez confirmed that Carmen will be able to join us for dinner via video call. Sophie paused in her ornament hanging. It would be the first time she'd spoken to her biological mother since learning the truth about her identity. Carmen had been making steady progress in treatment, and the doctors felt she was stable enough for this carefully planned reunion. "Are you nervous?" Daniel asked his daughter, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she handled a delicate glass ornament. "A little," Sophie admitted. "I mean, I've forgiven her, but talking to her is different. What if she's still sick? Then we'll handle it together," Grace said firmly. "All of us." The doorbell rang, and Sophie ran to answer it, returning with an armload of presents and a huge grin. "Aunt Evie's here." Evelyn Brooks had transformed over the past year. The guilt and confusion that had defined her life since learning the truth about Sophie's identity had gradually given way to purpose. She'd found work as a counselor at Grace's community center, helping other families navigate crisis and trauma. "Look at this place," Evelyn said, setting down her bags and taking in the warmth of the decorated house. "It feels like home." "It is home," Sophie said simply, hugging her aunt tightly. "Our home, all of us." As the afternoon progressed, the house filled with the comfortable chaos of family preparation. Daniel and Ethan worked on assembling a new violin stand for Sophie, their heads bent together over instruction manuals and scattered screws. Grace and Evelyn cooked together in the yellow kitchen, sharing stories and secrets the way women do when they're building trust. Sophie moved between all of them, the bridge that connected these separate lives into something cohesive and beautiful. At 5 o'clock, they gathered around Daniel's laptop for the video call with Carmen. When her face appeared on the screen, Sophie's breath caught. Her mother looked healthier than she had in years. Her hair was clean and styled, her eyes were clear, and there was a peacefulness about her that Sophie had never seen before. "Hi, baby," Carmen said softly, tears already streaming down her face. "Look at you. You're so grown up." "Hi, Mom," Sophie replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "You look good." "I feel good. Better than I have in a very long time." Carmen's gaze moved around the screen, taking in the faces of everyone gathered there. "Daniel, Grace, Evelyn, thank you all for making this possible. How are you feeling about being here?" Dr. Gonzalez's voice came from off-screen, where she sat monitoring the call. "Grateful," Carmen said immediately. "And sorry, so incredibly sorry for everything I put you all through." Daniel leaned forward. "Carmen, we've all learned a lot about forgiveness this year. You were sick. You thought you were protecting Sophie. We understand that now. But I still stole 8 years from you and Sophie. 8 years you can never get back. We can't get them back," Sophie said, surprising everyone with her maturity. "But we can make sure the years we have left count for something better." Carmen smiled through her tears. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from good teachers," Sophie said, looking around at the family that had chosen to love her despite everything. As they shared Christmas dinner over the video call, Carmen told stories about Sophie's early childhood that she'd never heard before. The first word she'd spoken, which was no, to no one's surprise. The way she used to insist on wearing her tutu to the grocery store. How she'd once tried to give a tea party for the neighbor's cat. "I kept a journal," Carmen said, "of all your milestones. All the cute things you said. Dr. Gonzalez thinks it might help with your recovery if you read it someday. To understand that period of your life you can't remember." "I'd like that," Sophie said. "There are still gaps, you know. Things I feel like I should remember but can't. Those memories might come back. Or they might not," Dr. Gonzalez interjected gently. "But what matters is building new memories going forward." After dinner, the family exchanged gifts. Sophie had made each person something personal. A framed photo for Evelyn, a bookmark for Ethan, a hand-knitted scarf for Grace, for Daniel. She'd created a photo album of their first year together, documenting their journey from strangers to father and daughter. When it was time for Sophie to open her gifts, she saved Grace's for last. Inside the carefully wrapped box was a small teddy bear, pristine and new, with a hand-embroidered tag that read, "For the woman who brought me back to Daddy. With love, Sophie." Sophie stared at the bear, then at Grace, then burst into tears. "I don't understand," she said. Grace knelt beside her. "Do you remember the pink teddy bear your father gave you when you were 4? The one that started this whole journey?" Sophie nodded, wiping her eyes. "That bear represented your past, the love that never stopped existing even when it was lost. This bear represents your future, the family we're choosing to build together." Sophie hugged the new bear tightly, then handed it to Carmen through the laptop screen. "I want you to keep this for me, Mom, until you're well enough to give it to me in person." Carmen's composure completely broke down. "Sophie, sweetheart, I don't deserve—" "Yes, you do," Sophie said firmly. "You're my mom. You made mistakes, but you're getting better. And when you're ready to come home, this bear will remind you that we never stopped being a family even when we were apart." Dr. Gonzalez had to end the call shortly after, but not before Carmen made Sophie promise to keep playing violin and doing well in school. "I love you, baby girl," Carmen said as the call ended. "All of you. Thank you for not giving up on me." As the evening wound down, Sophie sat curled up between Daniel and Grace on the couch, the old pink teddy bear in her lap, and the new one safely in Carmen's care in Arizona. "This is the best Christmas ever," she announced. "Even though it's complicated?" Daniel asked. "Because it's complicated," Sophie corrected. "Real families are messy and complicated, and sometimes people make terrible mistakes, but they love each other anyway." Evelyn, gathering wrapping paper into a garbage bag, paused to look at the picture they made. This blended, chosen family that had emerged from tragedy and loss. "You know," she said, "I spent 8 years thinking I was protecting you from your real family. Turns out I was just keeping you from finding them sooner." "You were protecting me," Sophie said loyally. "You kept me safe until Daddy could find me again. That matters too." As snow continued to fall outside and the Christmas tree lights twinkled in the darkness, Daniel realized that this moment, messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful, was everything he'd been searching for since that terrible day 8 years ago when his world fell apart. He had his daughter back. He had Grace's love and partnership. He had Evelyn's friendship and Ethan's acceptance. And somehow, impossibly, he even had Carmen's forgiveness and the promise of her eventual recovery. It wasn't the family he'd planned for or expected, but it was the family they'd chosen to become. And that made all the difference. "Merry Christmas, everyone," Sophie said sleepily, her head on Grace's shoulder. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart," Daniel replied, kissing the top of her head. "Welcome home." 18 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of what had once been Miller's pawn shop, now transformed into the Grace Miller Community Center. The walls that had once displayed desperate people's treasures now showcased children's artwork, family photos from successful reunifications, and certificates from job training programs that had changed lives. Grace stood in her office, adjusting her wedding dress one final time. Through the window, she could see Daniel directing the setup crew as they arranged chairs in the main hall, where families once came to pawn their last possessions. Today, it would host a wedding that celebrated not just the union of 2 people, but the healing of an entire extended family. "You look beautiful," Evelyn said from the doorway, carrying a bouquet of white roses mixed with desert wildflowers, a nod to the New Mexico journey that had brought them all together. "I'm nervous," Grace admitted, smoothing the simple but elegant dress she'd chosen. "Not about marrying Daniel, but about everything else. The speech I have to give, all the people watching, making sure Sophie feels included without overwhelming her." "Sophie's fine," Evelyn assured her. "She's been practicing her violin piece for weeks, and she's more excited about this wedding than anyone." In the main hall, Sophie was indeed practicing, her violin singing a beautiful arrangement of Canon in D, the same piece she'd been playing the day Grace first heard her. Though neither of them had known the significance then, Daniel paused in his setup work to listen, his heart full as he watched his daughter pour her soul into music that had somehow become the soundtrack to their family's redemption. Ethan appeared beside him, adjusting his tie. At 19, Grace's son had grown into a thoughtful young man who'd embraced his role as Sophie's big brother with surprising enthusiasm. "She's good," Ethan said, nodding toward Sophie. "Really good. The music teacher at Northwestern says she has conservatory potential. She gets it from Carmen," Daniel replied. Music was always her mother's escape. "How is Carmen doing?" Ethan asked. "Sophie mentioned she might be getting out soon." Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. Dr. Gonzalez says she's made remarkable progress, clean for over a year now, fully participating in family therapy sessions, working as a peer counselor with other patients. She'll be ready for supervised release in a few months. And you're okay with that? I'm okay with whatever's best for Sophie, and Sophie wants her mother to be part of her life again. When Carmen's ready. Daniel paused. We've all learned that healing doesn't follow a timeline. It happens when it happens. Across the room, Carmen's voice crackled through a laptop speaker as she joined the pre-wedding preparations via video call from Arizona. Sophie, that was beautiful, Carmen said, her face clear and bright on the screen. Your father would be so proud. He is proud, Sophie corrected gently. He's right here. The casual way Sophie navigated between her parents, acknowledging Carmen as her mother while claiming Daniel as her present tense father, no longer caused the tension it once had. They'd all learned to live in the complicated space between past and present, between grief and joy. Are you ready for this? Carmen asked Daniel directly, their relationship now characterized by cautious friendship rather than bitter recrimination. More ready than I've ever been for anything, Daniel replied honestly, as guests began arriving. The community center filled with an eclectic mix of people whose lives had intersected through crisis and healing. Former clients of the pawn shop mingled with Daniel's business associates. Families from Grace's programs chatted with neighbors from the old neighborhood. Mike Brennan, the private investigator who'd helped crack the case, sat next to Dr. Gonzalez, who'd flown in from Arizona specifically for the wedding. Quite a crowd, Grace observed as she and Daniel took their places at the makeshift altar, a simple arch decorated with flowers and photographs that told the story of their journey. Everyone who helped us get here, Daniel agreed, seemed right to include them all. The ceremony was officiated by Reverend Martinez from the community church, a man who'd seen enough broken families to appreciate the miracle of restoration he was witnessing. We gathered today not just to celebrate a marriage, he began, but to acknowledge that love comes in many forms. Sometimes it's the love that endures through loss. Sometimes it's the love that forgives the unforgivable. And sometimes it's the love that chooses to see possibility in the midst of destruction. When it came time for vows, Daniel spoke directly to Grace, but his words encompassed their entire blended family. Grace, you saved my life by helping me find my daughter. But more than that, you taught me that family isn't just about blood or legal documents. It's about who shows up. You showed up when I was broken. You showed up when Sophie needed a bridge between her past and her future. You showed up when Evelyn needed forgiveness, and when Carmen needed grace. His voice caught. You keep showing up, and that's made all the difference. Grace's vows were equally heartfelt. Daniel, when you walked into my pawn shop that day, you were looking for answers about a teddy bear, but what you found was something much more precious. The reminder that it's never too late to choose love over fear, hope over despair, connection over isolation. Today I choose you. And I choose this beautiful, complicated family we've built together. Sophie's violin solo during the ring exchange brought tears to every eye in the room. As she played, Carmen watched through the laptop screen, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed her daughter celebrating a new beginning while honoring their shared past. After the ceremony, as guests enjoyed cake and conversation, Sophie approached the laptop where Carmen waited. I wish you were here, Sophie said simply. I wish I was too, baby. But I'm so happy for all of you and Sophie. I'm proud of the young woman you're becoming. You're stronger and wiser than I ever was at your age. I learned from good teachers, Sophie replied, unconsciously echoing the words she'd spoken at Christmas. Including you, Mom. Even when you were sick, even when you made mistakes, you were still teaching me things, like how much someone can love another person, and how far they'll go to protect them. Carmen's composure broke completely. Oh, sweetheart, I love you so much. I love you too. And Mom, when you're ready to come home, we'll be here, all of us, later that evening. As the last guest departed and the community center returned to quiet, the family gathered one last time around Carmen's video call. I have something for you, Carmen said, holding up the new teddy bear Sophie had given her at Christmas. I think it's time this came home. Keep it a little longer, Sophie said, until you can give it to me in person. Are you sure? Sophie looked around at the faces surrounding her. Daniel and Grace, now officially her parents, Ethan, her chosen brother, Evelyn, her beloved aunt, and Carmen, her mother who was fighting her way back to health and wholeness. "I'm sure," Sophie said, "I have everything I need right here. That bear is your reminder that we're waiting for you, that there's a place for you in this family when you're ready to claim it." As the call ended and they began cleaning up the center, Daniel found himself standing in the spot where Grace's pawnshop counter used to be, the place where this entire journey had begun with a pink teddy bear and a desperate question. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, slipping her hand into his. "About how we got here. About how the worst day of my life led to the best day." "It wasn't a straight line, was it?" Grace observed. 8 years of grief, months of searching, complicated truths, difficult forgiveness. "No," Daniel agreed, "but maybe that's what makes it real. Maybe the families that last are the ones that have to fight for each other." Sophie joined them, still in her bridesmaid dress, but now barefoot, carrying her violin case. "Are we ready to go home?" she asked. Daniel looked at his wife, his daughter, and the life they'd built from the ashes of loss and the seeds of unexpected love. "Yeah," he said, wrapping them both in his arms. "We're ready." As they walked out of the community center together, the building stood as a testament to transformation, a place where desperate people had once traded their treasures for survival, now serving as a beacon of hope for families finding their way back to each other. Some stories, Daniel reflected, don't end with happily ever after. They end with the promise to keep choosing love, keep showing up, keep building bridges across the spaces that separate hearts. It was enough, it was everything, it was home.